Here is the statement for today's procedure. By the stars, how much?
11 weeks after the portal beneath Brookhaven tore itself into daylight, the town had developed a new kind of quiet. Not the old quiet, the one that used to settle over Main Street after the hardware store closed at 6, but a stranger, more attentive quiet. The quiet of a place that had learned to listen for engines that didn't sound like engines, for footsteps that landed a half-second too evenly, for the low hum that meant something had come through the portal and was walking around wearing a translator collar and a look of polite bewilderment. People still went to work. People still complained about the price of gas. But everyone, without quite admitting it out loud, had gotten into the habit of glancing twice at anything unfamiliar before deciding whether to be afraid of it. Dr. Marcus Webb had not changed his morning routine one bit, which was, he liked to say, the whole secret to surviving a first contact event without losing your mind. He still got to Webb Family Dental at 6:40, 40 minutes before his hygienist Priya or his receptionist Denise ever showed their faces, because that 40 minutes belonged to him and to no one else. He made the coffee too strong on purpose and unlocked the supply cabinet to count the composite resin cartridges, because counting things settled his hands before a full day of holding a drill 3 inches from somebody's molars. He was 58 years old, had been practicing dentistry in Brookhaven for 22 of those years, and had a left knee that announced the weather 2 days before the weather itself bothered to show up. His hands, though his hands did not shake, had never shaken, not once in 22 years, and he was privately, quietly proud of that the way some men are proud of a car they've kept running since college. He had a daughter at Ohio State studying environmental engineering, a phrase he could not fully explain to his mother-in-law without sounding like he was making it up, and the tuition bill sat in a drawer in his desk like a low, steady toothache of its own. He had a taped-up, hand-lettered sign above the front desk that had hung there for 11 years, long before any of this. "We don't do payment plans on promises, we do them on paper." And it had become, without his ever intending it, a kind of local landmark, a thing patients pointed at and laughed about while Denise ran their cards. He was elbow-deep in his second cup of coffee, reviewing the day's chart, 2 cleanings, a crown prep, and a walk-in slot he always left open for emergencies, when Denise came through the door at 7:18 with her coat still on and a look on her face that made him set the coffee down. "Marcus," she said, "there's somebody in the parking lot." Somebody or somebody. The second one. He went to the window. The alien was standing very still beside the flower bed Denise kept threatening to replant, hands folded in front of it in a posture that read, even to a species that had never seen this particular gesture before, as a kind of formal patience. It was taller than a man, but not dramatically, maybe 6'4", with a build that seemed assembled rather than grown, all long clean lines, and skin the color of wet slate that was faintly, almost embarrassingly translucent, so that beneath it ran a slow lattice of pale blue-white light, like veins lit from the inside, pulsing in a rhythm that did not match any human heartbeat Marcus had ever felt for a pulse. Its face was narrow and symmetrical, with no nose to speak of, just 2 vertical slits that flared gently, and eyes so dark they looked less like eyes than like 2 patches of night sky that had wandered onto its face and stayed. It wore a robe-like garment, deep green, embroidered along the collar with a pattern that shifted very slightly whenever the light caught it, and it was holding, cupped carefully in both long-fingered hands, the way you'd hold something that might spill, the left side of its own jaw. "Well," Marcus said, "guess we found out what the open slot's for." He went out the front door in his lab coat, no gloves yet, hands loose and visible at his sides, because 22 years of dealing with terrified 12-year-olds and grown men who'd rather face a bear than a needle had taught him that the first thing anybody scared needs to see is that you are not yourself, in a hurry. "Morning," he said. "I'm Dr. Webb, Looks like that side of your face is giving you some trouble. The alien's throat worked, and after a beat the translator collar caught up, rendering its voice in a smooth, slightly delayed baritone that didn't quite match the movement of its mouth. You are the one who tends teeth. That's the job, yeah. I am Vihen Athara Asel of the threading, third scholar rank. It said this the way a man might say his name and rank to a border guard, carefully, completely, as though leaving anything off would be its own kind of lie. I have been told by the and called Rahim, at the station beneath your town, that you are the tender of teeth most trusted in this district. Rahim's exaggerating, but I'll take it. What's going on with your jaw there, Vihen? There is a growth, beneath the bone, along what your species would call the lower left ridge. It began as discomfort perhaps 12 of your days ago. It has become, the pause here was long enough that Marcus recognized it as translation struggling with something that didn't map cleanly, become a thing I can no longer set aside to think about other matters. Can I take a look? Vihen's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around its own jaw. Marcus caught it. 22 years of watching people's hands had taught him to catch it, and didn't push. He just waited, standing in the cool morning with his coffee going cold on the windowsill behind him, letting the moment breathe. Yes, Vihen said finally. Yes, you may look. Inside, under the fluorescent lights of exam room 2, with Priya hovering by the sterilizer trying very hard to look like this was a normal Tuesday, Marcus got his first real look, and it was, well, it was a lot. Vihen's mouth, once it consented to open, revealed a jaw structure built on principles Marcus's dental school professors had never once gestured toward. 3 rows of narrow, layered teeth like the gills of a fish rendered in bone, set into a jaw that flexed in more places than a human jaw had any business flexing. And there, along the lower left ridge, exactly where Vihen had said, was a hard, swollen mass pale where the surrounding tissue glowed its faint blue-white, clearly displacing 2 of the smaller rear teeth and clearly, from the way Vihen's whole body had gone rigid in the chair, clearly hurting like hell. Okay, Marcus said, sitting back, snapping off his exam gloves to think out loud, which was another 22-year habit. That's an impacted growth. Looks like it might be pressing on what I'm gonna guess is a nerve pathway analogous to ours, given how you flinched. I want to get a scan before I say anything for certain, because your jaw's built different enough from what I know that I'm not going to pretend I can eyeball this. But if it's what it looks like, it's a straightforward extraction and drainage. I've done thousands of these. Not on your particular species, obviously, but the principle doesn't change much. Find what's crowding the healthy tissue, remove it clean, make sure nothing's left behind to fester. You would go inside, Vihen said. It wasn't a question exactly. It came out flat, careful, like Vihen was setting the words down on a table to look at them from a distance. Beneath the surface, into the interior of my body. That's the job, yeah, Marcus said again, gentler this time, because something in Vihen's stillness had shifted, gone taut in a way that had nothing to do with pain. I won't lie to you and say it's pleasant. I'll numb the area good assuming your biology takes to anesthetic anything like ours does, which we'll test small first, and it'll be over in under an hour, and you'll feel about 1,000 times better walking out than you did walking in. That growth's not going anywhere on its own. Vihen was quiet for a long moment, dark eyes fixed on Marcus's face with an intensity that made Priya, over by the counter, go very still and very interested in the autoclave. You understand, Vihen said slowly, what you are asking to do. I'm asking to fix your tooth, Marcus said, a little bemused now. Or your tooth-adjacent situation. I promise you it's not a bigger deal than that from where I'm sitting. It is, Vihen said, and something in its voice, some weight the translator hadn't quite smoothed out, made the hair go up on the back of Marcus's neck even though he couldn't have said why. It is a very much bigger deal than that. But I have looked at your record with this town, the burger place, the one who cuts hair. I have decided to trust you with it regardless. Marcus glanced at Priya, who gave him a small, baffled shrug, and decided, the way he decided 1,000 times with 1,000 nervous patients, that the thing to do was proceed calm, proceed steady, and let the explanations come later if they were going to come at all. "Then let's get that scan," he said, "and get you out of pain." The procedure itself went about as smoothly as any procedure Marcus had performed in 2 decades, which he would later reflect was almost funny given everything that happened after. Vihen's biology, once they'd tested a diluted anesthetic on a numbing patch of jaw tissue and waited 20 careful minutes to be sure of no adverse reaction, took to it readily enough, though Marcus adjusted the dose twice, murmuring to Priya the way he always did, working the problem the way he'd worked 10,000 problems before it. The growth came free clean, in one piece, a hardened knot of tissue about the size of a shooter marble, and the moment it was out, Marcus watched something in Vihen's rigid shoulders visibly unclench, watched the pulsing blue-white light beneath its jaw settle into a slower, easier rhythm. "There," Marcus said, holding up the extracted mass in a little dish for Vihen to see, the way he always did because people liked to see the thing that had been hurting them, liked proof it was really gone. "That's your troublemaker. You're going to be sore along there for a few days, ice, if your body does anything like swelling, which I'm guessing it does based on that scan, and soft food. Nothing that needs the rear rows for a week. But you did great. Didn't even need the second dose." Vihen sat up slowly, working its jaw with visible, cautious wonder, the pain that had apparently been a fixture for 12 days simply gone. Its long fingers came up to touch the outside of its own jaw, gently, almost reverently. "It does not hurt," Vihen said. "Nope. It has not hurt this little in 12 days. That's generally the goal." Vihen looked at Marcus for a long moment with those dark, star-filled eyes, and something passed across its narrow face that Marcus, 22 years into a career built on reading nervous faces, recognized immediately as gratitude so large it didn't quite fit inside the moment. "Thank you," Vihen said quietly. "Truly. I did not know before this morning that I would place something so precious into the hands of a stranger and have it returned to me whole." "Just doing my job," Marcus said, already turning to wash up, already mentally halfway to the crown prep waiting in room 3. "Denise'll get you squared away up front. We'll want to see you back in a week to check the healing, but call sooner if you get any swelling that doesn't go down with ice, or a fever, or anything that just doesn't feel right." "I will," Vihen said, and followed Priya out to the waiting room with the loose, unburdened walk of someone who has just set down a weight they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it was a weight. It was going about as well as any appointment in the history of Webb Family Dental, right up until Denise handed Vihen the receipt. Marcus was in room 3, halfway through numbing a molar on Mrs. Ferris for her crown prep, when he heard it, not a crash, not a shout, but a sound he would later describe to Rahim as the sound a room makes right before something goes very wrong. A sharp intake of breath, and then a silence so total it seemed to have weight. He stuck his head out of the room with the numbing needle still capped in his hand, and saw Vihen standing at the front desk, absolutely motionless, staring down at the small printed slip of paper in Denise's outstretched hand as though she'd handed it a live coal. $240, Denise was saying, in the same cheerful, slightly too loud voice she used for every patient, utterly unaware that anything was wrong. "That covers the exam, the extraction, and the follow-up we'll do next week. We can run a card. Or if you've got any of that alien currency the bank's been figuring out how to convert, we take that too. Marcus set up an account for it last month." "You are asking me to pay," Vihen said. Its voice had changed. The formal, careful cadence was gone, replaced by something flat and cold that made Denise's smile falter mid-sentence. "For this?" "Well, yeah, hun, that's just how it." "He went inside me." Vihen's hand came up, not to its jaw this time but out, toward Denise, toward the receipt, a gesture that in a human would have read as accusatory, finger extended, and on Vihen's long-boned hand looked almost like a blade unsheathing. He reached beneath the surface of my body, into the place no one is permitted unless I have chosen them with my whole self. I gave him that. I gave him access to the interior of me, the deepest thing my people have to give, and you stand here. The voice cracked, not with weakness but with something closer to fury, closer to grief. You stand here and tell me the price. Vihen, Marcus said, coming out of room 3 fast, still snapping off a glove. Hey, whatever's wrong, let's talk about it. Nobody's trying to. You knew, Vihen said, and turned that dark, starless gaze on Marcus, and it was worse somehow than the anger. It was betrayal, plain and total. You knew what you were asking. I asked you directly. I said, do you understand what you are asking to do? And you said yes. And this whole time, Vihen's hand went to a device on its belt, something small and dark that Marcus hadn't noticed before, half hidden beneath the embroidered robe. This whole time you meant to take payment for it. You meant to extract value from the single most vulnerable thing a person of my kind can offer another. There is a word for that in my language. There is no forgiveness attached to that word. Vihen, I promise you, nobody in this office has the first idea what custom we just stepped on, and I am asking you, please, don't touch that ing on your belt until you tell us. But Vihen had already pressed it. The sound that came next wasn't loud, not at first, a low, rising tone, almost musical, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The kind of sound Brookhaven had learned, in 11 short weeks, to recognize instantly and to fear completely. It was the sound of an alien distress signal, and within 90 seconds of its first note, the parking lot outside Webb Family Dental had begun to hum with the particular electric stillness of the sky opening up. By the time Marcus got the front door propped and looked out, there were already 3 cruisers angled across Maple Street with their lights spinning uselessly, officers standing beside their open doors with hands on their belts and no idea what they were actually facing. And behind them, gathering with the horrible speed of a town that had learned this drill too many times already, a crowd, the barber shop 2 doors down, had emptied out mid-haircut. Half the block from the diner across the street was standing on the sidewalk in aprons. Someone's dog was barking itself hoarse. And above all of it, cutting silently down through the gray Ohio sky, 3 long dark shapes that had not been there 5 minutes before, sleek and wrong-angled and utterly silent, throwing shadows across Main Street that made the whole gathering crowd take an involuntary step back. "Oh hell," Marcus said, very quietly to no one. Inside, Vihen had backed against the far wall of the waiting room, chest heaving, the blue-white light beneath its skin pulsing fast and erratic now, more like a wound than a heartbeat. And Denise was frozen behind the desk with the receipt still in her hand, like she didn't know what else to do with it. And Priya had gathered Mrs. Ferris, half her mouth still numb, utterly bewildered, back into the hallway, murmuring, it's fine, we've had this happen before, it's fine." In the tone of someone who had absolutely never had this happen before and was discovering that fact in real time. Marcus took a breath, set the capped needle down on the counter, and walked slowly toward Vihen with both hands open and visible, the exact same posture he'd used in the parking lot an hour earlier, because whatever else had changed, that part of the job hadn't. "Vihen, I need you to look at me, not the door, not the street, me." Vihen's dark eyes snapped to his, wild, and for a second Marcus genuinely didn't know whether the alien in front of him was about to attack or collapse. "I didn't understand what I was doing to you," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and even, the voice he used on 8-year-olds staring down their first cavity, the voice that said there is nothing here that is going to hurt you more than it has to. "I want you to hear that clearly, because I think it matters right now. I've been pulling teeth and draining abscesses and cutting into people's mouths for 22 years, and where I come from, that's a service, same as fixing a car or cutting a lawn. I charge for it because that's how I keep the lights on and pay for the equipment and put my kid through college. I never once in my whole life thought about it as taking something from a person. I thought I was giving something back to them. Their comfort. Their health. I did not know, I swear to you, on anything you want me to swear on, that for your people, letting somebody in like that means something so much bigger. If I'd known, I'd have found some other way to talk about the bill. I would never in 100 years have wanted you standing here feeling like I robbed you of something sacred, right after I spent an hour trying to take your pain away. Vihen's chest was still heaving, but the wild look had banked, just slightly, into something more like devastated confusion. Then why, Vihen said, did she ask for money? Because that's just how the system runs here. It wasn't some kind of trick, I promise you. It has already been sent, Vihen said, and Marcus realized with a sinking feeling that the alien meant the signal, meant the ships, meant the whole cascading mess now settling over Maple Street like a fog. It cannot be unsent. My kin line will already be moving. There is nothing left to do now but stand here and wait for it. Which was, more or less, the exact moment Rahim's beat-up gray sedan came screaming around the corner of Maple and Fifth and skidded to a stop half on the curb outside Webb Family Dental. Rahim Osai had been the station manager beneath Brookhaven for going on 11 weeks now, and in that time he had aged, by his own private estimate, somewhere around 11 years. He was 34. He looked, most mornings, closer to 45. He had a coffee mug on his desk that read World's OKAYEST Diplomat, a gift from his one remaining coworker who thought this was hilarious, and most days Rahim privately agreed even as he hated that it was true. He had been, before all of this, a facilities coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company, a job that had prepared him for absolutely nothing that had happened since the ground opened up beneath Brookhaven. Except, perhaps, one transferable skill, a bone-deep, hard-won patience for explaining the same misunderstanding to two exhausted, frightened parties until they both, eventually, calmed down enough to hear each other. He came through the door of Webb Family Dental at a dead run, tie already loosened, badge from the makeshift Brookhaven liaison office clipped crook to his shirt pocket, and took in the scene. Vihen pressed against the wall, Marcus standing calm but pale in front of the alien with his hands still spread open, Denise frozen at the desk, the growing storm of lights and sirens and silent dark ships gathering outside the glass front door in about a second and a half, and let out a breath that was 90% exhaustion and 10% something that, on a better day, might have been a laugh. "Okay," Rahim said. "Okay. Nobody move, nobody yell, and somebody please tell me it's not the barbershop again, because I genuinely do not think Denny's blood pressure could take a repeat." "It's not the barbershop," Marcus said. "It's me. I think I did something without knowing it was a big deal, and it turned into a very big deal." "Story of my life," Rahim muttered and turned to Vihen, dropping his voice, dropping his pace, doing the thing Marcus had watched him do twice before now on grainy phone footage and once memorably in person outside Frank's locksmith shop back in week 6, becoming, in the space of a breath, someone entirely calm in a room that had every reason not to be. "Vihen, that's your name, right? Someone told me on the way over. I'm Rahim. I work with the portal. I'm not going to tell you what you're feeling isn't real because I don't know your customs well enough to tell you that. And honestly, even if I did know them, that wouldn't be my place. So instead, I'm just going to ask you to tell me what happened, in your own words, slowly if you need to." And Vihen, chest still heaving, hand still hovering near the device on its belt, dark eyes flicking between Rahim's steady face and the chaos assembling itself outside the window, told him. The growth, the pain, the trust it had taken, the private, singular trust of allowing a healer's hands beneath the surface of its body, a thing Vihen's people called, in a word the translator rendered only approximately, Telvashin the opening, a thing given by Vihen's account only ever to kin, to bonded partners, to those a person had chosen with their entire self to be vulnerable before. And then the receipt, the number, the casual, cheerful demand for payment for exactly the thing that had just been given. It felt, Vihen said, and its voice dropped very low, like being told that my vulnerability was a resource to be harvested, that the trust I offered was not received as trust at all, but as an opportunity. My kin line calls this atren Sabbath, the taking of a gift as though it were a debt owed. It is among the gravest violations we recognize. It is why the signal was sent. Rahim nodded slowly, taking every word of it in without flinching, without rushing to defend Marcus, without doing anything except listening like the words mattered, which Marcus was beginning to understand. Watching him was probably the entire secret to the job. "I hear you," Rahim said, "and I believe that's exactly how it felt. I want you to know that before I say anything else, because I think you need to hear that somebody actually heard you before we go trying to untangle whether it's true." He glanced toward the window, where the crowd outside had swollen to something like 60 people, and where one of the dark ships had begun, very slowly, to descend toward the empty lot behind the diner. "But I also think we've got about 4 minutes before whoever's on that ship lands, and I would really, really like to have a plan before that happens. So can you help me with something? Can you tell me, does your custom have anything built into it for when the taking wasn't understood as taking, for when it was a mistake instead of a theft?" Vihen's dark eyes narrowed, considering, and for the first time since the receipt had changed hands, something in its rigid posture eased, just barely, toward thought instead of fear. "There is a distinction," Vihen said slowly, "between atren Sabbath, which is deliberate, and what my grandmother's line calls unmarked harm given without the knowledge that harm was being given. But it is rarely invoked with strangers. It requires the wronged party to believe fully in the ignorance of the one who wronged them. And it requires," Vihen's gaze flicked to Marcus, sharp, assessing, "it requires the one who wronged them to explain themselves, truly, not to apologize. Apology in my culture is cheap. Anyone can offer sorrow. It requires them to explain plainly what they believed they were doing, so that the wronged party can judge for themselves whether the belief was honest." "I can do that," Marcus said immediately. "I can absolutely do that." "You will not have the chance to do it quietly," Vihen said, and nodded toward the window, where the descending ship had touched down now, its underside folding open with a low mechanical sigh. "Because that is my kin elder's escort, and she does not travel for small matters." The figure who came through the settling dust of the diner's empty lot 10 minutes later was not Zorak. Marcus had half expected, from the rumor mill around town, that any serious incident eventually summoned the burger place commander, but a smaller, older-looking alien of Vihen's same species, moving with a slow, deliberate gravity that made the assembled crowd instinctively part like water. Her robe was a deep, near-black green, far more elaborately embroidered than Vihen's, and the light beneath her slate skin pulsed slower, steadier, the unhurried rhythm of someone who had navigated 1,000 crises calmer than this one. 2 escorts flanked her, silent, watchful, and behind them, Marcus caught it with a small jolt of relief, came a third, taller, unmistakably formal figure he recognized immediately from a dozen grainy phone photos taped up around town. Commander Zorak, who had apparently been close enough, or concerned enough, to arrive within minutes of the signal going out. "Elder Kesu," Zorak said by way of introduction, inclining his head toward the older alien as they crossed the parking lot together, "has jurisdiction over matters of Telvashan among the threading. I came because Vihen is known to me, and because—" A flicker of something dry passed across Zorak's composed features, unmistakably rueful, "because I have grown, against my own expectations, somewhat protective of how this town handles its misunderstandings." Elder Kesu did not waste time on pleasantries. She stopped a few feet from the door, dark eyes sweeping the office, the taped-up sign above the desk, Denise still frozen with the receipt, and finally settling on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel, for a strange, dislocated second, exactly like a first-year dental student under oral exam. "You are the one who opened my grandniece," she said. "It was not a question." "I'm the one who removed the growth from Vihen's jaw." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, and did not look away and did not apologize because some instinct, the same one that had told him 20 minutes ago not to reach for Vihen's hand or raise his voice, told him that apology was not what this moment was asking of him. Vihen was in real pain. I fixed it. And afterward I asked for payment the same way I ask every single patient who walks through that door for payment. Because I didn't understand, genuinely did not understand, until about 15 minutes ago, that what Vihen gave me by letting me do that was something bigger than a dental procedure to your people. Explain it to me, Elder Kesu said. Not the growth, the payment. Why you ask for it at all if what you did was truly given as a kindness. Marcus glanced briefly at Rahim, who gave him the smallest, steadiest nod, go ahead, and then at the taped-up sign above his own front desk, 11 years old, edges yellowed, and found, somewhere in the middle of all that, the exact words he needed. I've been fixing people's teeth since I was 36 years old, Marcus said. I've got a wife who's put up with me smelling like antiseptic for 22 years, and a daughter in college studying something I can barely explain, and a mortgage, and a knee that tells me when it's gonna rain 2 days before the weatherman does. When somebody sits in my chair, I give them everything I've got, my training, my hands, my full attention, every single time, whether it's a 6-year-old scared of the drill or somebody like Vihen, who I'd never even met an hour before. That part's not for sale. Nobody could pay me enough to fake caring about whether it hurts when I do this job, and nobody's ever had to, because I don't fake it. But the lights in this building cost money. The equipment costs money. You saw that machine I used to numb Vihen's jaw. That thing cost more than my truck. Priya's salary, Denise's salary, my daughter's tuition, all of it. Where I'm from, the way that works is, I give you my skill and my care for free, every time, no matter who you are or what you can pay. And separately, not instead of that, not as a condition of it, but separately, I ask you to help cover what it costs to be ready for you. That sign up there, he nodded toward it, has been on my wall 11 years, since before any of you existed as far as this town knew. It doesn't say pay me for caring. It says I'll do the work honestly, and I need you to be honest back about the cost of keeping the doors open. That's the whole of it. That's all that piece of paper Denise handed V. Hen ever meant. It was never, not for 1 second, a price tag on what got given inside that exam room. If I'd known your people heard it that way, I promise you, on my daughter's life, I'd have found some other way to say it. The waiting room had gone completely silent. Outside, even the crowd on the sidewalk seemed to have quieted, pressing close to the glass, watching. Elder Kesu regarded Marcus for a long, unreadable moment, her dark eyes moving once slowly from his face to his hands, steady, still, folded loosely at his sides, and then to the taped-up sign, and then, finally, to Vihen, still pressed against the far wall. "Grandniece," she said, "you believed this to be Atren Savath." "I believed it in the moment," Vihen said quietly. "I am less certain now." "And do you believe him honest?" Vihen looked at Marcus for a long time. Longer, Marcus thought, than the moment strictly required, as though Vihen were not just weighing his words but running back through the whole hour, the careful hands, the held-up dish with the extracted growth, the quiet thank you truly, the unhurried voice that had never once in the chaos of the last 20 minutes risen or hardened or turned defensive. "I believe him honest," Vihen said finally. "I believe he did not know. I believe also that what he did for me this morning was a kindness I have not felt from a stranger since I left my kin world, and that the confusion after does not undo that." Something in Elder Kesu's rigid posture loosened, very slightly, the pulsing light beneath her slate skin settling into a slower rhythm, and she turned back to Marcus with an expression that had shifted from judgment into something closer to careful, weighing curiosity. "Then this is unmarked harm," she said, "and unmarked harm among the threading is not left unanswered, but it is answered differently than a true violation. A true violation demands restitution taken. Unmarked harm demands something offered, freely, by the one who caused it without demand, in acknowledgement of what was nearly broken." Her dark eyes settled on Vihen. "Grandniece, what would you ask of him if you were free to ask anything?" Vihen was quiet for a long moment, and then slowly pushed itself off the wall and crossed the waiting room to stand in front of Marcus, closer than it had come since the panic began, close enough that Marcus could see the fine, intricate detail of the embroidery along its collar, the slow blue-white pulse beneath its throat. "You gave me something today," Vihen said. "Something my people would call a great trust, offered to a stranger who did not even know its weight. I would like to offer something back that carries the same weight, not money, which means nothing between us now, but something true." It paused. "Among my kin, the name we are given at birth is spoken only by those closest to us. Everyone else uses the formal name, the scholar name, the rank name, the name I gave you this morning. To share the birth name with someone outside the kin line is considered among the deepest gifts we have, rarer, even, than Telvashin itself, because it cannot be taken back once given, and it means, I trust you to hold something of mine that I do not hand to strangers." Vihen's throat worked, and the translator, for once, seemed to hesitate before rendering the next word, as though even it understood the weight of what was coming. "My birth name is Ishka," Vihen said. "I give it to you freely, Dr. Marcus Webb, as payment I believe matches what was given to me this morning. Not because you demanded it. You never once demanded anything from me but the price on that piece of paper, which I now understand for what it truly was. I give it because it is the only thing I have that is worth what you did." The waiting room was very quiet. Marcus, who had spent 22 years learning to keep his face steady through every kind of human emotion a dental chair could produce, found that his throat had gone tight in a way he hadn't expected. "Ishka," he said carefully, testing the shape of it. "I'm honored, I mean that. And for what it's worth, the $240 is on the house, today and the follow-up next week. Some things aren't worth arguing about twice." Something that might, on a human face, have been the beginning of a smile flickered at the corners of Vihen's, Ishka's, narrow mouth. "Elder Kesu will tell you that debts settled in kindness rather than obligation are the only debts my people consider truly closed." "She is correct," Elder Kesu said dryly, "and she will also tell you that this town appears to specialize in exactly this particular flavor of catastrophe, given what I have heard of the burger establishment and the man who cuts hair." She glanced toward Rahim, and something almost like amusement passed across her ancient, careful face. "You, station manager, does this happen every week?" "Feels like it some weeks, ma'am," Rahim said with the particle. Our exhausted honesty of a man who had genuinely lost count. "But it always ends about like this. Turns out most of what looks like an attack around here is just two people who didn't know they were speaking different languages about the same thing." "A fragile way to build a peace," Elder Kesu observed. "Maybe," Rahim said, "but it's the only kind we seem to be any good at." By the time the ships lifted off an hour later, drawing their long dark shadows back up off Maple Street, a local news van had arrived, too late for the actual crisis. In time for the quiet human interest tale end Brookhaven's paper had gotten disturbingly good at covering, and caught Marcus on the front steps, lab coat still on, being asked how it felt to nearly start what half the town had already started calling, with dark humor, an interstellar incident over a filling. "It wasn't a filling," Marcus said, mostly to correct the record, "and ask me again in a week, once my hand stopped shaking a little on the inside." Denny from the barber shop wandered over during the tail end of it, still in his work apron, and clapped Marcus on the shoulder with the solidarity of a man who had, 6 weeks earlier, stood in almost exactly this same spot for almost exactly this same reason. "Welcome to the club," Denny said. "First one's always the scariest. There's a group text, Frank started it after the locksmith thing, Mike joined after the tow truck. You're getting added the second I get back to my chair." Inside, once the cameras had gone and the crowd had thinned and Denise had finally, hands still faintly trembling, sat back down at the front desk. Rahim lingered a few minutes longer than he strictly needed to, leaning against the doorframe of exam room 2 while Marcus washed his hands for what felt like the 40th time that morning. "You did good out there," Rahim said. "Better than most people manage on their first go." "Didn't feel like it from the inside." "It never does." Rahim rubbed a hand over his face, the exhaustion of 11 weeks settling visibly back over his shoulders now that the immediate crisis had passed. "You want the honest pattern since you're in the club now. It's never actually about the money. Not once. Cameron wasn't trying to insult anybody by charging for a burger. Denny wasn't trying to insult anybody by charging for a haircut. You weren't trying to insult anybody today. It's never the charging. It's that every single one of these species out there built their whole society around some rule about trust or consent or honor that we never had to think about, because we've never had a reason to. And then they meet us in the one place where we're not thinking about it either, the checkout counter. And it just goes off like a landmine nobody marked. So what do? Put up a sign that says explain your customs before we ring you up. Honestly, Rahim said, with a tired, genuine laugh, at this rate, that might not be the worst idea you've had all week. He pushed off the doorframe, glancing toward the front, where through the glass they could both see Ishka still lingering by the flower bed where it had first appeared that morning, speaking quietly with Zorak, the younger scholar and the old commander, silhouetted against a sky that had, an hour ago, been full of ships. For what it's worth, though, the way you talk to her elder in there, explaining yourself instead of apologizing, that's the whole trick, every time. People can forgive a mistake made honestly a lot easier than an apology that's really just trying to make the awkward feeling go away faster. You gave her the truth instead. That's rarer than it should be. I just told her about my mortgage and my kids' tuition. Yeah, Rahim said, that's the truth. Turns out it usually is. Marcus walked Rahim out a few minutes later and found Ishka waiting by the door instead of the flower bed, jaw visibly, comfortably healed already beneath the slate-gray skin, the blue-white light beneath it pulsing slow and steady now, the rhythm of someone entirely at ease. "I will return in a week," Ishka said, as instructed for the follow appointment, "and I will tell my kin line what happened here today, not the signal, not the ships, though those parts will be told regardless, because my elder does not leave out inconvenient details. I will tell them about the sign on your wall. I think they will find it strange and a little wonderful, the way you have built an entire practice of honesty around 11-year-old tape and handwriting." "It's held up longer than most things I've built," Marcus said. "You take care of that jaw, Ishka, ice if it swells." "I will," Ishka said, and then, after a small pause, added something that the translator rendered with unmistakable warmth. "Thank you, Dr. Webb. Truly, this time not the thanks I gave you this morning, before I understood the whole of what had passed between us. This one is the real one." Marcus watched the owl walk off across the parking lot toward Zorak's waiting escort, past the flower bed Denise still hadn't gotten around to replanting, past the skid mark a police cruiser had left on the curb, and thought, not for the first time since all of this began, but with a clarity that felt new, that the whole fragile experiment of Brookhaven seemed to be holding together on something far smaller and sturdier than diplomacy. It was holding together on people telling each other the plain, unglamorous truth about what they did for a living, and why, and trusting the truth, once actually heard, would turn out to be enough. That evening, after Priya had gone home and Denise had locked the register, and the parking lot outside had gone back to its ordinary, unremarkable stillness, Marcus stood for a minute in front of the front desk, looking up at the sign that had hung there for 11 years. "We don't do payment plans on promises. We do them on paper." Its edges a little more yellow than they'd been that morning, or maybe that was just his imagination. He thought about getting Denise to print a new one. Something that covered this, something that explained. In the end, he decided against it. Some things, he figured, a person just had to be told, honestly, face to face, the first time they came through the door. No sign was ever going to say it better than that. He switched off the lights and went home to a knee that was already, quietly, predicting rain.